Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zeckthar,
And I'm Yuksen.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, yet for the next couple of months, we'll be discussing the greatest disaster in the history of the Imperium of Man. That's right, folks, the Horus Heresy.
Indeed. Now, this will be interesting because instead of covering a particular faction, we'll be following a timeline. Starting from the Great Crusade, we will end at the Siege of Terra.
That's right, but before we start, if you like our stuff, feel free to follow, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really like our boxes, feel free to join our membership program, like Sabinder Byington, our very first member.
Quite right, brother, and thank you to our newest member, Hermes Skirty. Well, what are we going to talk about today, Zeckthar?
Well, this week we'll be discussing the worst loss of the Imperium during the Horus Heresy, the Drop-Site Massacre. Now be warned, folks, this is one of the most important parts of the Horus Heresy, so we would be remiss if we didn't slow down a bit and try to give you the whole scoop of what was happening.
What my brother is trying to say is this one is going to be a wee bit longer. But don't worry, it won't be as long as Cadia Stan.
Hopefully.
Now, as we mentioned last week, while the Purge of Esfand III went well for the traitors, it did not go perfectly. The battle was supposed to take place in a vacuum, so the War Master had more time and maneuverability to deal with the rest of his brothers. In this, he failed, because Nathaniel Garrow escaped the trap and warned the Imperial Fist of what was happening. The other reason the cat was out of the bag was because of Fulgrim. Now, you might have been wondering last week when we discussed the atrocity of Esfand III, where was Fulgrim? Well, he was trying to convince his dearest friend and brother, Horus Manus, to join Horus's cause.
Yes, which you discussed in Fulgrim's Fall from Grace, yes?
Indeed, brother. And if you want more details into the meeting, you can check it out there. But to make a long story short, it didn't go well, and Fulgrim failed to turn the Gorgon to Horus's call. Now, Horus was already in a foul mood when Fulgrim showed up to give him the bad news, and the Phoenicians' failure enraged the War Master. Nevertheless, he still had to make preparations for the inevitable response of the Emperor, which was likely to arrive more quickly than anticipated, and the traitors needed to be prepared for it. Fulgrim was tasked to take a detail of the Emperor's children to the ruins of the alien fortresses that existed on Esfand V, and prepare that world for the final phase of the Esfand operations. Though the Phoenician recoiled at the horrifying prospect of the menial labor placed upon him, Horus soothed his brother's monstrous pride when he explained that the Esfand V phase of his plan was the most critical, and he could entrust this vital task to no other. With a grumble, Fulgrim supervised the vast teams of Dark Mechanicum earth movers as they shifted the black sand of Esfand V and formed a vast network of earthworks, trenches, bunkers, and readouts that stretched along the ridge of the Urgal Plateau. Loggers of anti-aircraft batteries were set up in the shadow of the walls, and mighty orbital missiles on mobile launch vehicles hid in the warrens of an ancient alien fortress. Fulgrim had set up his command within the remains of the keep and begun the work of ensuring that it would be a bastion worthy of the War Master. If the Emperor's legions wanted to destroy the traitors, they were going to have to come down to the surface of Esfand V to do so, as no orbital bombardment would be powerful enough to dislodge the defenders or crack the resolve. Now, as Horus made ready his traitorous brothers, the Imperium was reeling with the news of betrayal. With the cat out of the bag, Doran made ready for war, and the first man he called was happy to hear from him, Horus Manus. Now, I must mention before we continue, anyone who has done research on the Iron Hands knows them to be almost emotionless in their tactics and thoughts. Now, a lot of this has to do with Horus Manus, who was anything but emotional. Now, while this would probably make him a decent hang, and it seemed most of his brothers got along with the man, it did make him a little easy to goad in battle.
A little?
I was just trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, brother. In this particular moment, the Gorgon was enraged at his brother's betrayal and was very eager to deal justice to the traitors when he received the call from Rogel Dorn. He was delighted even more when Dorn told him that he would have supreme command over the punitive force of 8 Astartes legions, consisting of the Imperial Fists, Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Salamanders, Alpha Legion, Raven Guard, Word Bearers, and his own Iron Hands.
Pardon me, brother, but why didn't Rogel Dorn himself take command of the punitive legions?
Well, he was personally heading back to Terra to inform the Emperor himself of Horus's betrayal.
Ah,
It was probably a good thing, too, because he was then tasked with the fortification of the Sol system, and I can't think of any other Primarch more suited to the task. Yet even from the beginning, portents of doom struck the Force. Owing to turbulence from the warp, the Imperial Fists were becalmed and prevented from reaching their goal, but the others made great haste, and through masterful applications of the astropathic coordination and favorable transit, the avenging forces of the Emperor made swift speed to their target, with the forerunners being the Salamanders and Raven Guard fleets and their attendant forces, with the others following close behind. Now, it is important to note that at this early stage of the Great Conflict, the full scale and rank horror of Horus's betrayal were yet to unfold, and both his motivations and the murderous depth of his ambition remained unclear. While the Imperium believed wholeheartedly that it had the upper hand both in material strength and capacity to act, there were those among the Loyalists still utterly baffled by what could have triggered Horus's betrayal. And in the private councils of those who knew of the matter, which was still far from common knowledge, talk of mental breakdown and megalomaniac insanity on Horus's part, or even a cancerous control of some hideous alien form, such as the Crave or the Enslavers, was common speculation as to the cause of this sudden treachery. Regardless of this confusion as to its genesis, the judgment of the Imperium was to be swift and savage in its execution, and Horus's rebellion, swaying as it had 4 Space Marine legions to his cause, was judged more dangerous than any that had gone before it during the Great Crusade. But it was also generally thought that Horus would content himself with carving out an empire of his own as the Emperor's rival. Although clearly a false assumption in hindsight, with this hypothesis in mind, the selection of Esvon, a strategically significant star system, seated at the confluence of several known stable warp routes, but one also far distant from the seat of the Imperium's power, as a base for this treacherous domain made a certain sense, as did the wisdom of immediate attack before the traitor's stronghold could be properly established.
now, as the Loyalists' fleet closed on the Isfon system, it received the target's information relayed by astropathic transmission. It was received with a mixture of bellicose fervor and some trepidation. Given the scale of the concealed activity on Isfon 5, it was clear that the enemy was rearing up a fortress of prodigious strength there, no doubt intended to be the headquarters of the War Master's rebellion and principal mustering ground. The absence of the traitor's fleet, however, was a more troubling matter, but one perhaps easily explained by a needful scramble for resources and supply from distant systems in preparation for a conflict to come. And if indeed the traitors were sure that no sizable counterattack could yet be attempted upon them, such a brave gamble was in keeping with Horus's known character. The fleets of the Salamanders and Raven Guard arrived at Isfon 5 first, finding local space apparently deserted. Achieving orbital superiority uncontested, they undertook observation and recon missions, able to map out the traitor's position accurately and realizing it required a full-scale ground assault to destroy it. The Iron Hands contingent arrived next, and the 3 Primarchs hesitated, both as their orders apparently stipulated that the 7 legions should attack together, and because they realized that they could not ensure victory with additional support. Upon learning that the 4 remaining legions were mere hours away from translating in system, Ferrus Manus convinced his brothers Corax and Vulcan to attack immediately, secure in the knowledge that they would receive reinforcements in the field from inbound legions. For Ferrus Manus, the absence of the traitor's fleet in the Isfon system was not so much a cause of suspicion as it was an opportunity that should not be wasted. And to the grim mind of the master of the Iron Hands Legion, it was an error for which the enemy would be made to pay. The time to strike was now, before the enemy fleet returned and crushed the rebellion with a single concerted attack. It was a judgment shared by many. They had caught the traitor's preparations in disarray. Horus's disposition were half made and his defenses incomplete. The enemy was vulnerable, or so the loyalists thought. Marine Istvan V was one of the largest fleets ever gathered in the history of the human species. Without a doubt, it was the most impressive coalition of Astartes vessels ever gathered, with the scouts, cruisers, destroyers, and command ships of 7 entire legions present. Shuttles and gunships ferried between the heaviest cruisers, while the decks of every warship made ready to deploy their warriors in an unprecedented, unified planetfall. Horus had decided to make his stand on the surface. The Imperium of Man had sent 7 legions to kill its wayward scion. The warriors of the World Eaters, Death Guard, Sons of Horus, and Emperor's Children had deployed throughout the defenses constructed along the ridge of the Urgal Depression, making ready for the howling storm of battle that was soon to descend upon them. Long-range support squads manned the walls of the fortress, and traitor army artillery pieces waited to shower any attacker with high explosive death. The Dias Irae stood before the wall, its colossal guns primed and ready to visit destruction on the enemies of the War Master. Hundreds of thousands of Astartes hunkered down on the northern edge of the Urgal, their guns ready and their hearts steeled to the necessity of what was to come. The first warning came when a dull red-orange glow built behind the clouds, bathing the Urgal in a fiery light. Then came the sound, a roar that built a deep, thrumming bass to shrieking whine. Alarms sounded and clouds split apart as the individual streaks of light burned through and fell in a cascading torrent of fire. Thunderous explosions ripped along the edge of the Urgal, and the entire length of the War Master's forces were engulfed in a searing, roaring bombardment. For long solar minutes, the forces of the Emperor that had just moved into orbit over Istvan V pounded the Urgal Plateau from orbit, a firestorm of unimaginable ferocity, hammering the surface of Istvan V with the power of the world's end. Eventually, the horrific bombardment ceased and the drifting echoes of its power faded, along with the acrid smoke of explosions. But the Emperor's children had performed perfectly in creating a network of defenses from which to face their former brothers, and the forces of the War Master had been well protected. From his vantage point in the alien-built keep, Horus smiled, and he watched as the sky darkened once again as thousands upon thousands of drop pods and stormbirds streaked through the atmosphere towards the planet's surface to carry out the initial Loyalist assault. For the Loyalists, the plan was simple. Vulcan's legion assaulted the left flank of the traitors' battle line, while Ferrus Manus, the Iron Hand's first captain Gabriel Santor, and 10 full companies of elite Morlock Terminators charged straight into the center of the enemy lines. Meanwhile, Korax's legion hit the right flank of the enemy's position. The odds were considered equal. Horus was aware of the location of the Loyalist chosen drop site, and his troops fell upon the Loyalist legions.
All right, hang on. I'm going to say something here real quick. Pardon me, Yuksen. But the odds were considered equal? That's not a good way to start a battle, in my opinion. You normally want the odds on your side.
Yeah.
Not equal, but
Flip a coin, one of us will win.
yeah. Sorry to interrupt, Yuksen. Carry on, sir.
The battlefield of Istvan V was a slaughterhouse of epic proportions. Treacherous warriors, twisted by hatred, fought their former brothers in arms in a conflict unparalleled in its bitterness. The mighty Titan war engines of the machine god walked the planet's surface, and death followed in their wake. The blood of heroes and traitors flowed in rivers, and the hooded hair-tech adepts of the Dark Mechanicum unleashed perversions of ancient technology stolen from the Eurasian technocracy to wreak bloody havoc amongst the Loyalists. Hundreds, perhaps even thousands of traitors had been slaughtered in the opening moments of the assault. All across the Urgal Depression, hundreds died with every passing second. The promise of inevitable death, a pall of darkness that hung over every warrior. Thousands were dying every minute, the slaughter terrible to behold. Such destruction had never been concentrated in such a horribly confined space. Enough martial power to conquer an entire planetary system having been unleashed in a line less than 20 kilometers wide. The slaughter continued unabated, on a scale never before seen, with neither side able to press home their advantages. The traitors were well dug in and had defensible positions, but the loyalists had landed almost directly on top of them with numerical superiority. The bloodletting was a truly horrific sight, as warriors who had once sworn great oaths of loyalty to one another fought their brothers with nothing but hatred in their hearts. No legion fared well in the slaughter, as the scale of the fighting rendered tactics meaningless as the two armies battered each other, bloody and remorseless conflict that threatened to destroy them all. The traitor forces held, but their line was bending beneath the fury of the first loyalist assault. It would take only the smallest twists of fate for it to break. The forces on the surface were in combat for almost 3 hours with no clear victor emerging. The loyalists waited for the second wave of allies to make planetfall, believing they would be reinforced for their final advance. The traitors all knew the parts they had to play in this deadly performance. They were all aware of the blood they needed to shed to install Horus as the master of mankind. Though the Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and Salamanders had managed to make a full combat drop and secure the loyalist drop site known as the Urgal Depression, they did so at a heavy cost. What had begun as a mass strike against the traitors' position was rapidly turning into one of the largest engagements of the entire Great Crusade. All told, hundreds of thousands of Star's warriors clashed on the dusky plains of Istan V. For all the wrong reasons, this battle was soon to go down in the annals of Imperial history as one of the most epic confrontations ever fought. Where one side lost ground in one place, it gained in another, and the battle line shifted again and again, with no advantage pressed home on either side in the wake of such utter destruction wrought by both. The black sands ran red with blood. Tens of thousands of space marines had died in little over 2 solar hours of battle, a cataclysm never before seen in open conflict, and tens of thousands more fought on, brutalized and injured. Such was the mind-shattering tumult that scores of human auxiliaries, hardened even as they were by the wars of the Great Crusade, simply fell to their knees, paralyzed in terror, or became crazed and had to be shot down by their overseers, lest they endanger their comrade. Slowly, inexorably, the traitor lines began to bow dangerously backward. As the slaughter at the fortress line continued unabated, at the rearmost part of the Urgal Depression, a vast crimson bulk had slowly descended, anti-aircraft fire stitching black and scorches across its cylindrical armored sides. It was a battle maniple of Legio Ateris, the Firebrand's Titan Legion in their microlander, and their arrival had been warranted by the heart-bloom signatures of others of their kind advancing through the billowing dust storms from the desert plains. The Legio Mortis was approaching also, and at their colossal striding feet raced scores of Predator tanks, Outrider and Jetbike squadrons, drawn from the Sons of Horus and World Eaters legions. The auguries showed the Legio Ateris was outnumbered and outclassed. For the Legio Ateris, the chance to attack the erstwhile brethren of the Legio Mortis was not merely the desire of those who had stayed loyal to punish the traitor, but the culmination of a long, simmering grudge that had its roots decades before this day. So it was with the righteous anger that the titans of the Legio Ateris sounded their great sirens and charged into battle against their foe, and in doing so became the first loyalist Titan Legion in the War of the Horus Heresy. The battle that followed was brief but brutal. At the cost of their own complete destruction, the Firebrand's counterattack effectively neutralized the second Legio Mortis contingent. The delayed and badly mauled Traitor Legion flanking forces was then systematically destroyed by the Iron Hands subjugator group. The Urgal Depression was churned to ruins beneath the boots and tank treads of countless thousands of Astari's warriors and their legion's armored divisions. The loyalist Primarchs could be found where the fighting was thickest. Korax of the Raven Guard, borne aloft on black wings, bound to fire-breathing flight pack. Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands at the heart of the battlefield, his silver hands crushing any traitors that came within reach, while he pursued and dragged back those who sought to withdraw. And lastly, Vulcan of the Salamanders, armored in overlapping artificer plating, thunder clapping from his warhammer as it pounded into yielding armors, shattering it like porcelain. The traitorous Primarchs slew in mirror image to their brothers, Angron of the World Eaters, hewing with wild abandon as he raked his chain axes left and right, barely cognizant of who fell before him. Fulgrim of the lamentably named Emperor's Children, laughing as he deflected the clumsy sweeps of Iron Hands warriors, never stopping his graceful movements even for a moment. Mortarion of the Death Guard, in disgusting echo of ancient Terran myth, harvesting life with each reaving sweep of his great war scythe. Silence. And then there was Horus, the former War Master of the Imperium, the brightest star and greatest of the Emperor's sons. He stood watching the destruction while his legions took to the field, their liege lord content in his fortress rising from the far edge of the ravine. He was shielded and unseen by his brothers still waging war in the Emperor's name. At last, above this maelstrom of grinding ceramite, booming tank cannons and chattering bolters, the gunships, drop pods, and assault landers of the second loyalist wave burned through the atmosphere on screaming thrusters. The sky fell dark as the weak sun was eclipsed by 10,000 avian shadows, and the cheering roar sent up by the loyalists at the arrival of their comrades was loud enough to shake the air itself. Like fiery comets from the heavens, the thrusters of countless dropships, landers, and assault craft broke through the fire-shot clouds of smoke and descended to the loyalist landing zone on the northern edge of the Urgal Depression. Hundreds of Stormbirds and Thunderhawks roared towards the surface, their armored hulls gleaming as the power of another 4 Legion Astartes came to his spawn. Their heroic names legendary, their mighty deeds known through the length and breadth of the galaxy. The Alpha Legion, Word Bearers, Night Lords, and Iron Warriors. The traitors, the bloodied and battered legions loyal to Horus, fell into fighting withdrawal without hesitation. Overwhelmed with rage, the headstrong Ferrus Manus disregarded the counsel of his brothers Korax and Vulcan and hurled himself against the fleeing rebels, seeking to bring Fulgrim to personal combat. His veteran troop, comprising the majority of the 10th Legion's Terminators and Dreadnoughts, followed. Well, how do you think it is going so far, brother?
Well, if you don't know how this story ends, it seems like it's going fairly well, right?
Fairly well?
Well,
The way it sounds is basically 50-50.
well, yeah, but you know, if you don't know how it ends anyways, they're all of a sudden anyways getting twice as many troops anyways to come back them up. And all of a sudden anyways, the traitors are starting to withdraw. That normally is a good sign. Although, okay, so we both know what's going to happen here in a minute, and I will go into it here in a second. But I do have a few tactical problems with this whole thing. One that I'm assuming you have a few as well. But before you give your concept, I want there's 2 actually very important ones that I kind of want to go over, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The first one, I kind of mentioned it, is that when they started this whole battle, it was like the odds were even. That's not a good way to start a battle. I mean,
Right.
unless you're like, for instance, unless you're on Horus's side, he should be looking at this going, okay, I mean, it's better than, what I anticipated, kind of thing. We're equal. if you're the engaging force, that shouldn't happen. You should know better. That's the concept. Normally, you want an oversized force anyway, so that you can pummel your enemy in. I mean, I understand that sometimes you can't always do that, and also, anyways, sometimes, like for instance, like let's say, anyways, they had the equal amount of troops, but the loyalists had space marines and the traitors, it was just auxiliaries. Yeah, by all means, anyways, just mop the floor with them. You've got better trained troops. Yes, this makes sense. But if you're going head to head and it's going to be equal like that, that's just not a good way to start, in my opinion. What do you think?
I think having all the forces drop in one location when you're trying to use groups flanking is a stupid idea.
Yeah, I agree with you.
They should have dropped in 3 different places.
I mean, yeah, you've got the whole play. Well, especially, I mean, okay, it would be a little bit harder with the salamanders. With the Raven Guard, on the other hand, they got jump packs. You should be able to drop those guys anywhere, anyways, and they should be able to drop down wherever they need to go.
The fact of the matter is though, what they should have done is they should have had it where basically there's the Iron Hands and part of the Raven Guard and part of the Salamanders would drop in one location. And then the rest of the Raven Guard would drop in another location off to, well, apparently the right, I guess, since that's where they had them going. And then the rest of the Salamanders would be on the left. Drop somewhere on the left.
So what you're saying, anyways, is to spread out your forces so that you can try to flank at some point or another instead of just charging down the hill in mass.
Yeah, but still have the majority of your forces in that mass so you can keep the majority of the forces focused on them while you have the 2 people going on either side.
Well, not only that, but it keeps them in a holding pattern because that's your strongest force and it's punching into them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wholeheartily agree. I mean, the tactics on this aren't the soundest.
I mean, I'm sure you can show them a picture when you
Oh, yeah. I'm going to have lots of maps and pictures on this. But the other thing, though, is, okay, and yes, they're looking at this as a battle tactics anyways, and if you look at it, you're just kind of like, why are they just running straight down the hill? And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, and we kind of talked about it, but it was very brief, was the fact that they really honestly thought they were going to have 4 other Space Marine legions anyways coming in behind them to back them up. And it was the concept of strike while the iron is hot, right?
Right, but that doesn't change the fact that using actual tactics in comparison
I agree.
Charging headlong.
No.
My question is, why is it that Vulcan was put in charge of it?
Why was it Vulcan put in charge of it?
Yeah.
Everybody liked Ferrus Manus better?
I
don't know.
Vulcan's supposed to be considered one of the most intelligent ones there.
Well, I think so all 3 of them, by the way, are considered actually very good tacticians. I can say probably the reason why Korax wasn't put in charge is because the way he did combat was so different than anybody else. And the way he does combat is actually what you would think today anyways, with the way combat is waged on Terran 42. That's the way he does war, which isn't the way the Imperium does it. So it's kind of interesting. But I can see why that's why he wasn't in charge. Vulcan, on the other hand, the only thing I could really guess is he didn't have the numbers that Ferrus Manus did. I'm betting that Ferrus Manus had more troops there than Vulcan did. So therefore, Dorn was just like, okay, you're in charge.
Well, I guess so, since, well, we'll get into it later, but not even all of his forces were on the ground.
Right. My wonder or puzzlement, though, is the concept of before they even dropped. The fact that the fleet wasn't even there, the traitor fleet wasn't there, and they're just like, aha, we've caught Horus. There wasn't a single one of them anyways that went, wait a minute. This is Horus we're talking about. I mean, he normally knows what he's doing. I mean, there's a reason why he was in charge of the whole Great Crusade. So,
well, if you're paying attention, they thought that what he was doing was he thought he had more time, and so he was sending people out to get more resources they could collect. Right.
But But the thing that concerns me is not a single one of them thought, anyways, could this be a trap? Especially because they had fought wars, anyways, countless wars over countless galaxies with their brother. Not a single one of them, anyways, went, so who thinks this is a trap? That's the concerning part that I have. I mean, and it kind of makes sense when you stop and think about it, because like you said, anyways, is that the Imperium thought they had more troops. They were the stronger force. They were, I mean, it was almost like an ego trip.
Well, plus the fact that you're also taking into the fact that basically you had 7 legions were going to be there.
Right.
Even if the ships popped up later, you have 7 legions of ships versus not even 4 legions worth of ships. Because, they didn't even have all their ships because some of them were destroyed due to the less than total victory of Istvan 3.
Right. Okay, so then here's my question for you anyways. Okay, this is kind of the way that I was thinking of it anyways, is that if you pop out anyways and out of the warp and there's only 3 of your fleets there and you're going to get another 4, right? You know they're coming within the next hours. Why don't you anyways try to hide your ships anyways in strategic positions around Istvan 5 and then wait for the fleet to come back, the trader fleet to come back, and then ambush them? That way you've got 7 whole fleets against 4, and then you can destroy them, and then you can do whatever you want. You could just even leave Istvan 5 anyways with a flotilla around it and just starve them out at that point.
Yes, but that wasn't the objective they were given, was it?
No, their objective anyways was to win, as any objective there is anyways in combat. I'm just saying, I don't know why anybody didn't think of this.
Because it's not the Imperium way. It's the Alpha Legion way. It's not the Imperium way.
Well, not only that,
exactly like something Alpha Legion would do, except for on top of that, they would start sowing chaos inside of there, so people would be going, I don't have water anymore. It's his fault. Kill him.
Right. Now, mind you, anyways, I think actually one of the main reasons why that also didn't take place is because of Ferrus Manus. I mean, he was pretty pissed off by the time he shows up.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all,
a lot of this was an emotional decision, is what I'm saying.
Well, first off, as I'm sure you mentioned in your Vox, before this, what had happened was not only had he found out that probably his best friend basically became traitor. His best friend tried to kill him and his men on his ship.
Kind of. They came to blows, and then Fulgrim, in all honesty, could have killed Ferrus Manus in that situation. He couldn't do it because they were such close friends and true brothers. He did kill the rest of his men, though, before he left.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes. But you can kind of agree with me anyways that probably one of the reasons why this wasn't as tactically sound is because Ferrus Manus was so pissed off.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I think it would have been smarter of Dorn to have gone, we should probably put Vulcan, at least in charge of the planning part.
Right.
Ferrus Manus in charge of the execution, but have Vulcan in charge of the planning.
That would have actually been probably the best idea. Or even, who knows, the concept anyways of sending Ferrus Manus back to tell the Emperor what's going on, and Rogel Dorn took over the situation.
Like that would fly.
I'm just saying, it would make more sense.
Just imagine that, Rogel Dorn going, you know what, you're going to go to Terra. Right.
No, I'm not. Yeah.
You don't want to say that again. Just come over to my ship and try to say that in my face again.
Yeah. I'll pick up my hammer and you can pick up your sword and we'll figure this out.
I'm not even going to have my hammer. I'm just going to have my fist.
Yeah. Fair point.
What a real fist is in comparison to your imperial fist. Now, brother, why don't you reveal why the Battle of Istvan 5 is also known as the Drop-Site Massacre?
Well, the second wave of loyalist Space Marine legions descended upon the landing zone of the northern edge of the Urgal Depression. Hundreds of Stormbirds and Thunderhawks roared towards the surface, their armored hulls gleaming as the power of another 4 Astartes legions arrived on Istvan 5. The Iron Warriors had claimed the highest ground, taking the loyalist landing site, with all the appearance of reinforcing it through the erection of prefabricated plasteel bunkers. Bulk landers dropped the needed battlefield architecture. Dense metal frames fell from cargo claws of carrier ships at low altitude. And as the platforms crashed and embedded themselves in the ground, the craftsmen warriors of the 4th Legion worked, affixed, bolted, and constructed them into hastily rising fire bases. Turrets rose from the protective housing in the hundreds, while hordes of lobotomized servitors trundled from the holds of the Iron Warriors' troop ships, single-minded in their intent to link with the weapon system's interfaces. The Word Bearers bolstered their brother legions on one flank of the Urgal Depression, while the Night Lords took position on the opposite side. Down the line, past the mounting masses of the Iron Warriors' battle tanks and assembled Astartes, First Captain Zeckthar of the Night Lords and his first company elite, the Atramatar, took up defensive positions. Both the Word Bearers and the Night Lords were to be the anvil, while the Iron Warriors would be the hammer yet to fall. The Loyalists would stagger back to them, exhausted, clutching empty bolters and broken blades, believing their presence to be a reprieve. It is held by some sources that, upon the arrival of the 4 fresh legions, Corax, the usually taciturn Primarch of the Raven Guard, was the first to call for withdrawal for those fighting in favor of the newcomers to take the lead. His legion had suffered severely in the battle, as had all the combatants, and he had no desire to waste further lives in pointless attrition, where stronger forces, yet unbloodied, might take to the fore. Vulcan was also in favor of consolidation, his legion having seen some of the most relentless and savage fighting against the Death Guard. The dark weapons of the 14th Legion had inflicted a great many casualties, and almost all of Vulcan's warriors were counted among the fighting wounded, their munitions all but spent. Dragging their wounded and dead behind them, Corax and Vulcan led their forces back to the drop site to regroup, and to allow the warriors of their recently arrived brother Primarchs of the second wave a measure of the glory in defeating Horus. Though they voxed tales requesting medical aid and supply, the line of newly arrived Astartes atop the northern ridge remained grimly silent, as the exhausted warriors of the Raven Guard and Salamanders came to within 100 meters of their allies. It was then that Horus revealed his betrayal and sprung his lethal trap. Inside the black alien fortress where Horus made his lair, a lone flare shot skyward, exploding in a hellish red glow that lit the battlefield below. The fire of betrayal roared from the barrels of 1,000 guns, as the second wave of Astartes revealed where their true loyalties now lay. The Loyalists' supposed allies opened fire upon the Salamanders and Raven Guard, killing hundreds in a fury of the first few moments, hundreds more in the seconds following, as volley after volley of bolter fire and missiles skied through the unsuspecting ranks. Even as terrifying carnage was being wreaked upon the Loyalists below, the retreating forces of the War Master turned and brought their weapons to bear on the enemy warriors within their midst. Hundreds of World Eaters, sons of Horus, and Death Guard Astartes fell upon the veteran companies of the Iron Hands. And though the warriors of the 10th Legion continued to fight gallantly, they were hopelessly outnumbered and would soon be hacked to pieces. The Iron Hands had damned themselves by remaining in the field instead of retreating like their fellows. The Raven Guard's front ranks went down as if scythed, harvested in a spilling line of detonating bolter shells, shattered armor and puffs of bloody mist. Black-armored Astartes tumbled to their hands and knees, only to be cut down by a sustained volley, finishing those who fell beneath the initial storm of head and chest shots. Seconds after the first chatter of bolters, achingly bright laser beams slashed from behind the word bearers as cannon mounts of land raiders, predators, and defensive bastion turrets gouged through the Raven Guard and the ground they stood upon. The Iron Warriors and the word bearers kept reloading, opening fire again, hurling grenades, and then preparing to fall back. The word bearers' legion had taken up landing positions on the west of the field, ready to sweep down and engage the Raven Guard from the flank. 3 figures stood atop a roof of an ornate command tank, the Land Raiders' bronze and gray armor decked out with flapping banners and etched with fingernail-fine scripture over every visible surface. Cor Pharaon, master of the faith, watched the distant drop site through a desperate squint. The word-bearer's first chaplain, Erebus, the architect of Horus's fall to chaos, stood at his side. Lorgar towered above both of them, but had no attention to spare for those treacherous opening salvos against the warriors of the Raven Guard and Salamander legions. He stared into the battlefield's heart, his eyes wide even in the wind, His lips gently parted as he watched his brothers killing each other. Fulgrim and Ferris, the fading sunlight flaring from the edges of their swinging weapons. The wind stole the clash and clang of their parries, but even in silence, the duel was beyond captivating. No human senses, save those as acute as a Primarch's, could have followed such instant liquid movements. The perfection of it all almost brought a smile to Lorgar's lips. As the Primarch watched his two brothers engage in their furious duel, he recalled a time long before when Ferris had presented him with a weapon he had personally forged. Ferris had crafted the fine Crozius Maul, Illuminarium, as thanks for the reinforcements of the 10th Legion by the Word-Bearers at Galadon Secundus. Snapping back into reality, the seed of doubt crept into Lorgar as he played witness to the slaughter around him. But with the prodding and reassurance of his adopted father, Cor Ferro, Lorgar ordered his Word-Bearers to attack. At point-blank range, the unsuspecting legionnaires of the Salamanders and the Raven Guard were cut down by the hundreds by those they thought were their brothers. Battered tanks and dreadnoughts that had weathered the storm of 3 solar hours, the most hellish combat the Legiones Astartes had ever seen, were caught in a blizzard of missiles and las cannon fire from those they expected to be allies, their explosive pyres igniting in droves up and down the Loyalist battle line. Night Lord's gunships raked across the sky, raining down phosphex and cluster munitions, screaming raptors following in their wake. And without warning, the Alpha Legion were in amongst the hastily set up apothecarium stations of the rear echelon, murdering with ruthless efficiency, while their fast-moving armor mechanized squads encircled the Salamanders before slicing into them with surgeon's precision. From behind the steel-clad emplacements of the Iron Warriors, the vaunted artillery of the Stor Bazach spoke, their deadly Scorpius-patterned whirlwinds and Minotaur siege guns laying waste to the stunned Imperial Army battalions and ravaging the first wave's landing zones, while their Cerberus and Typhon tanks advanced to rip apart the Imperial Army's super heavy tanks at close quarters. Taking stock of their dire situation, the Primarchs Corax and Vulcan differed over how to salvage what they could from the situation. The Salamander's Primarch suggested that the Loyalists attempt to make a tactical withdrawal to their respective dropships and dig in to resist any further attacks. Corax advocated instead that the Loyalists should do whatever they could to make good their escape from the slaughter, as the battle was lost. Neither Primarch could agree with the other, and so Corax turned from Vulcan and ordered his legion to retreat. In the meantime, the second wave of the traitor legions that had turned upon their former allies began to slaughter the Loyalists in earnest. The Iron Hands were apparently slaughtered to a man. In the midst of this brutal carnage, 2 Primarchs from the opposing sides confronted one another in a final showdown. Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children and Ferris Manus, once as close as true brothers could be, fought a bitterly contested, titanic struggle.
And if you want to hear the whole account of this battle, feel free to listen to my brother's Vox, The Fall of Fulgrim. But to give you the skinny of it here and now, Fulgrim kills the Gorgon with his demon sword known as the Blade of the Lair.
Yes, well, on the other end of the battlefield from the duel between Fulgrim and Ferris Manus, the Raven Guard were confronted by the treacherous Word-Bearers and their Primarch Lorgar, the first Captain Cor Ferron, and the first Chaplain Erebus at their vanguard. The 2 legions fought one another in bitter combat. In the midst of this battle, the Word-Bearers unleashed the elite unit known as the Gal Vorbak, Astartes who had allowed themselves to be possessed by demons. They attacked the Raven Guard's Primarch en masse, but despite the advantage of their numbers, Corax's formidable abilities as a consummate warrior proved to be more than a match for the possessed Astartes, and he slew them with impunity. Amidst the carnage and the slaughter, the anger of the demigod was released. Beyond anger, beyond rage. It went beyond both, for it was wrath in physical form. Corax charged into the ranks of the traitorous Word-Bearers, a blur of charcoal armor and black blades, butchering with an ease that echoed his ferocity. Soon the voices of dying Word-Bearers became a conflicting chorus over the Vox as they screamed for help. Argel Tal, the Crimson Lord and leader of the demon-possessed Gal Vorbak, Lorgar's blessed son, leapt forward to meet his end at the hands of an enraged demigod. Meanwhile, Lorgar mirrored his brother Primarch's actions, the slaughtered enemies Astartes with a contemptuous ease. Just as the Word-Bearers struggled to stand before Corax, so did the Raven Guard fall back and die in droves. Suddenly, the Urizen halted his attack. He noticed that Korax was wading through the Gal Vorbak, ripping his demon-possessed Crimson warriors apart. Given a blessed respite from the Primarch's murderous advance, the Raven Guard were falling back from him in a black tide. They left their dead in a carpet at the Primarch's feet. Despite the protestations of both Cor Pharon and Erebus, Lorgar disregarded their counsel and sprinted forwards across the churned earth and dead bodies of his brother's legion. To engage in battle, he had no hope of winning. He saw his brother, a man he had barely spoken to in 2 Terran centuries of life, a man he barely knew, butchering his sons in a vicious rage. There was no thought of conversation, no hope of bringing Korax into the fold, or enlightening him enough to cease this murderous rampage. Lorgar's own anger rose to the fore, burning away the passionless killing of only moments before. As the Wordbearer's Primarch hammered his way through the ranks of the dying Raven Guard to reach his brother, he felt power seethe within him, aching to rise out. Always before, Lorgar had bitten back his psychic potential, hiding it and hating it in equal measure. It was unreliable, erratic, unstable, painful. It was never the gift it seemed to be for Magnus the Red, and thus Lorgar had swallowed it back, walling it up behind unyielding resolve. Yet no more. A scream of a release tore itself free, not from his mouth, but his mind. It echoed across the battlefield. It echoed into the void. Energy sparked from his armor, and a sixth sense unrestrained at last, with his purity perhaps colored by chaos, exhaled from his core. Lorgar felt the heat of his own fury made manifest. He felt his unchained power reaching out, not only to enhance his physical form, but reaching to his sons across the battlefield. And there he stood at the heart of the killing fields, winged and haloed by amorphous contrails of psychic fire, shouting his brother's name into the storm. Korax! Korax answered with a shriek of his own, the call of the betrayer, the cry of the betrayed, and the raven met the heretic in a clash of Crozius and Lightning Claw. In response, the Gal Vorbak underwent their final metamorphosis, changing into their true demonic forms. Their ceramite armor had fused to flesh, layered by dense bone ridges and spines, as they sprouted all manner of razor-sharp claws, talons, and wings. They warped into new bestial forms, marking them out as amongst the first of the possessed. Meanwhile, the Primarchs fought in furious combat, Korax fighting to kill, while Lorgar fought just to stay alive. During their duel, Korax hurled insults and accusations at his former brother. He wanted to know why Lorgar and his legion had committed such treachery. Lorgar shared with his brother the future visions he had seen of their father, a bloodless corpse, enthroned upon a seat of gold and screaming into the void forever. Angered by his brother's lies, Korax lashed out furiously with his pair of lightning claws across Lorgar's face, cutting the meat of his cheeks deeply. Lorgar would bear these scars until the day he dies. The two Primarchs traded vicious blows, but the Raven Lord had the advantage of not only speed and finesse, but also being a mighty warrior with solar decades of fighting experience. Lorgar did not, for he had always been more of a scholar than a warrior, and his lack of experience cost him dearly, as Korax impaled Lorgar through his stomach, the tips of his meter-long talons glinting to the side of his spine as they thrust out his back. Such a blow meant little to a Primarch. Only when Korax heaved upwards did Lorgar stagger. The claws bit and cut, sawing through the Wordbearer's body. The Crozius Illuminarum slipped from the impaled Primarch's fists. Those same hands wrapped around Korax's throat, even as the Raven Lord was carving his brother in half. The Raven Lord remained untroubled by his weaker brother's grip. Lorgar crashed his forehead against Korax's face, shattering his brother's nose. But still he could not free himself. The Raven Lord gave no ground, even as a second, third, and fourth headbutt decimated his delicate features. The claws finally jerked, snagging against Lorgar's enhanced bones. Korax tore them free, inflicting more damage than the first impaling had done. Blood hissed and popped as it evaporated on the force-fielded blade claws. Lorgar fell to his knees, hands clutched over the ruination of his stomach. As Korax stepped closer, he raised his claw to execute his brother. Lorgar screamed his defiance at Korax, lost in the irony that of all the sons of the Emperor, He was the one soul of the 20 Primarchs who had never wished to be a soldier. And now here he would die at the heart of a battlefield. As the claw fell, it struck opposing metal. Korax looked to meet eyes as black as his, and a face as pale as his own. His claw strained against the mirrored weapon, both sets of blades scraping as they ground against each other. One claw seeking to fall and kill, the other unyielding in its rising defense. Where the Raven Guard Primarch's features were fierce with effort, the other face wore a grin. It was a smile both taunt and mirthless, a dead man's smile. Once his lips surrendered to rigor mortis. It was Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter and the Primarch of the Night Lords. Korax sought to wrench his claw free, but Kurz's second gauntlet closed on his brother's wrist, so that Korax would be unable to fly away and escape his fate. Kurz looked upon his prostrate brother and ordered him to rise from his knees, disgusted at his cowardice. Korax was not idle as this exchange took place. He fired his flight pack, burning his fuel reserves to escape Kurz's grip. The Raven Lord's claw ripped free, and Korax soared skyward, carried on jet thrusts away from Kurz's rising laughter. Kurz then shoved Lorgar back towards his word bearers. Around them, the Grey Legion warred with the warriors in black. Lorgar thanked his brother for saving his life, but Kurz warned him that he would let him die next time. Lorgar's bitter retort was halted as he took in the scene of the transformed Gaul Vorback. Their armor was crimson and rigid bone. Great claws, both metallic weapons, and fleshy-jointed talons extended from bestial arms. Every helm was horned, and every faceplate was split by a demon's skullish leer. Disgusted by this horrific sight, Kurz turned his back on Lorgar and commented that he was so much more than merely foul. He was rancid with corruption. Though grievously wounded, Lorgar would live. The traitors had carried the day and dealt the Emperor and the Imperium a grievous blow. As the Horus heresy began in earnest, Horus now possessed 9 Space Marine legions and had all but destroyed 3 of the remaining 9 Loyalist legions. The path to Terra was wide open, and the decisive battle of Terra and the siege of the Imperial Palace would follow after 9 more years of blood and terror as the traitor legions penetrated to the very heart of the Imperium of Man. Now, before we discuss this in length, what happened to the trapped Loyalists, brother?
Well, lesser troops would have given up and accepted their fate in the face of such overwhelming opposition. But the warriors of the Salamanders and Raven Guard were no mere mortals. They were Astartes. So they fought like never before, knowing their doom was at hand, and desiring to make the traitors pay in blood for every one of their number that fell. Unrelenting gunfire from the Iron Warriors at the drop site and the resurgent forces along the Urgal depression crushed the Salamanders and Raven Guard in a terrifying vice and cut them to pieces in a murderous storm of fire and blood. Refusing to surrender, the remaining Raven Guard and Salamander Astartes stubbornly defended themselves, trying to hold off the inevitable slaughter for as long as possible. Though they suffered an atrocious number of casualties, the Loyalists managed to hold their own, until Primarchs Mortarion of the Death Guard and Angron of the World Eaters joined the fray. Any hope for escape for the Loyalists was quickly crushed when the traitorous Iron Warriors destroyed the first wave's dropships. Despite the odds arrayed against them, some of the Loyalists on the ground managed to survive, then miraculously escaped through the tightening cordon of traitors that surrounded their position. The Raven Guard fared better than the Salamanders at escaping the brutal massacre, but the Salamanders managed to assist a few surviving Astartes from the decimated Iron Legions to also escape the slaughter. As for Vulcan, he and his Salamanders had at last been driven together to fight a desperate final stand, and were perhaps the last to fall, encircled by 1,000 foes and engulfed in a cataclysm of firepower. At the climax of the massacre, the Iron Warriors launched a tactical nuclear missile strike at Vulcan's position, annihilating those Salamanders with him and ending Vulcan's participation in the battle. Imperial history did not record the ultimate fate of the surviving Salamanders, though an unconscious Vulcan survived the assault and nuclear blast, only to be taken prisoner and tortured for long solar months by his brother Conrad Kurz. On the black sands of Iston 5, more than 200,000 Space Marines lay dead, A Primarch had been slain and 2 others were missing, presumed dead. Their legions all but wiped out. With them died the Emperor's own dream of dominion of the stars.
Now, after the killing had stopped, and the dead were gathered into great funeral pyres across the broken desert of the Urgal Depression, the once gray skies of the planet burned orange with the reflected glow of 1,000 pyres. The firelight bathed the rippling glassy sands in a warm radiance, and towering pillars of black smoke from the burning corpses filled the air. Thousands of Astartes loyal to Horus gathered before a great reviewing stand, constructed by the tech priests of the Dark Mechanicum with astonishing speed. As the sun began to sink beyond the horizon, the smooth black plains of the stand shone with a blood-red glow. The stand was erected as a series of cylinders of ever-decreasing diameter, one standing atop another. The base was perhaps 1,000 yards in width, constructed as a great grandstand upon which the sons of Horus stood, their preeminent position as the elite of the War Master, and no doubt after this great victory. Each warrior bore a flaming brand, and the firelight cast brilliant reflections from their armor. Atop this pedestal of flame was another platform, occupied by the senior officers of the 16th Legion. Above the senior officers of the Sons of Horus stood the traitor Primarchs. The sheer magnificence of such a gathering of might was breathtaking. 7 beings of monumental power stood in the penultimate tier of the reviewing stand, their armor still stained with the blood of their foes, their cloaks billowing in the winds that swept the Urgal Depression. Finally, the uppermost tier of the reviewing stand was a tall cylinder of crimson that stood 100 yards above the Primarchs. Horus stood atop of it, his clawed gauntlets raised in salute. A furred cloak of some great beast hung from his shoulders, and the light of the corpse pyres reflected from the amber eye upon his breastplate. The War Master was illuminated from below by a hidden light source, bathing him in a red glow that gave him the appearance of the statue of a legendary hero, as he stood looking down on the endless sea of his followers from the towering platform. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, a flight of assault craft roared over the Urgal hills, their wings dipping in salute to the mighty warrior below. Solid waves of cheering crashed against the reviewing stand, howls of adulation torn from tens of thousands of throats. No sooner had the aircraft passed overhead than the amassed Astartes began to march around the reviewing stand, their arms snapping out and hammering their breastplates in salute of Horus. At some unseen signal, a flame ignited on the northern slopes of the Urgal Depression, and a blazing line of phosphor leapt across the ground in a snaking arc that described the outline of an enormous blazing eye upon the hillside. The adulation soared to new heights as the eye of Horus seared itself into the sands of Esfand 5, the War Master's forces roaring themselves hoarse in his praise. Super heavy tanks firing in salute of Horus, and the towering immensity of the Dias Arai inclining its massive head in a gesture of respect. The ashes of the dead fell like confetti over Horus's mighty army as thousands of traitor Astartes cheered. Their cries of "Hail Horus! Hail Horus!" resounding long into the darkness. Yet, very much as it was on Esfand 3, Horus's victory was not total, and as usual, containment failed first. In space!
In the space above Isstvan 5, the war fleets of the Loyalists had also been betrayed and assaulted, and there, although overly matched, the battle had not been such a one-sided affair as the traitors would have liked. The Loyalist vessels had been fully void-shielded and on battle alert, as befitted them in a war zone, and were quick to respond in kind once the initial unexpected assault had been weathered, with many of their number damaged, but far from destroyed by the sudden attack of their supposed allies. The resulting void battle had lasted for many more solar hours than the carnage on the ground, and some Loyalist warships had fought on stubbornly, refusing to abandon their Legion planet side to whatever dark fate had befallen them, even as they paid the ultimate price for their loyalty. Others, badly damaged, were either driven off or, realizing the futility of the overwhelming odds they faced as the fleet of the first traitor legions reappeared, succeeded in escaping the system, the hounds of the enemy at their heels and bitter vengeance in their hearts. Now, I know I briefly went over what happened to the Shattered Legions of the Iron Hands and the Salamanders, but I left the Raven Guard specifically for you, brother, because I know they're one of your favorites.
Well, thank you. The Raven Guard story is a tale straight out of legend. And one of the reasons the Raven Guard are one of my favorite legions. They show courage, tenacity, and a savageness that even Leman Russ would respect. To tell such a story in such little time as we have today would be a travesty.
Let me guess, you're going to do a bonus flex on it.
Correct, brother. Correct.
Well, until you do, the Raven Guard did plug an epic campaign of hit and run tactics, keeping the traitors off their tail while getting them to chase their own. They were eventually saved by a vanguard of Raven Guard dropships. These dropships were part of a desperate rescue mission that had been devised by Commander Bran, a Raven Guard captain who had been left in charge of the Legion's homeworld of Deliverance. Now, before we get to the aftermath of this horrific travesty, what do you think of what took place here, brother?
Well, first off, I gotta say anyways, Horus kind of lives up to his name. Being a brilliant tactician and great strategist. I mean, you couldn't have planned this any better if you were Horus. I mean, it brings to mind anyways a quote from a great general from Terran 42 named Sun Tzu. And it is, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. The reason I bring this out is that, I mean, Horus knew Ferrus Manus. He knew anyways his brothers. He knew anyways how they would react anyways to what was taking place. So he knows that. He knows anyways his advantages and disadvantages. So he set up literally the perfect trap. He knew Ferrus Manus was going to be so pissed off anyways at his brother, he would do something stupid like, I don't know, charge headlong into, his lines. It was, quite frankly, brilliant on his part. It's probably his greatest victory, I think of anyways in the Horus Heresy. But when it comes to everything else, yeah, it sucks. I mean, everybody else anyways just kind of, they lost, and they lost bad. It wasn't just kind of like, oh, well, we lost the battle. It's like, it's almost like they lost the war before the war even started kind of concept. I mean, go ahead.
What I find interesting is the absence of what the Night Lords were doing at the time through all the resources that we've looked through.
The Night Lords?
Yeah, they were there.
Or maybe you're talking about the Alpha Legion.
No, they mentioned the Alpha Legion. I don't remember them mentioning the Night Lords themselves.
The Night Lords were securing the flanks anyways for the Iron Warriors.
They were what?
They were securing the flanks anyways for the Iron Warriors. And then they did actually end up assisting, if I recall right, they end up assisting the Word Bearers when they come down anyways hard on the Raven Guard. That's why Conrad Kurz anyway showed up to save his brother. Which I know a lot of people don't like Kurz. This is one of the few moments anyways in history that I think most people are like, yeah, I kind of like him. And just the fact anyways, the way that he regards his brother Lorgar, to me, and he was like, is perfect. I mean, here's this guy anyways who's an insane schizophrenic nightmare of a person, and he looks at his brother anyways in contempt and says, you are so corrupted, it's just, I don't even know how to deal with you. And then walks away.
My head is, he is so messed up, and he still has the point of view of going, man, you're really messed up.
I know. It's just one of those kind of shocking moments. And I would have loved to actually see it anyways, at some point or another anyways, and I don't think it ever happens. Conrad Kurz and Korax actually going toe-to-toe. I don't think they ever do. I think this is the closest they get to it, right?
As far as I'm aware of, yes. But the fact that Korax was wary of him to begin with, when him just showing up and trying to get away as soon as possible, shows you that it would have been a hard fight between the two of them.
Yeah. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about Kurz is that he's probably one of the top tier fighters of the Primarchs. I mean, he's up there. I mean, he went, okay, so who did he end up fighting? He fought Lionel Johnson a couple of times. He fought Vulcan a bunch. Rabute Gilman as well. Sanguinius, I think, even. He kicked the crap
Yeah,
out of
yeah, Sanguinius, because there's that stupid recording that nobody else can fathom why on earth they had that battle.
He did kick the crap out of Dorn, which that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, he's actually probably one of the top tier fighters. I don't know, we're gonna get a lot of flack for that because nobody likes Conrad Kurz, but I mean, if you go back through the lore, anyways, he's kind of a beast on the battlefield. You may not like him, but I mean he's kind of there. I think the one guy he didn't actually fight that I would consider a top tier. I don't think he ever fought the Khan, and I don't think he fought Lehman Russ.
No.
I think those are the two guys. I may be wrong about that, but I think those are the two guys that I'm thinking of, anyways, that I don't think he ever came to blows with. And that would be actually that'd be a great battle. It'd be also along the same lines as what I was talking about before. But what do you think of this whole thing?
It was well executed, all things considered, anyways. Horus has this knack of doing very well and then having some really unfortunate things happening.
He just, yeah, I kind of agree. It doesn't seem like he ever gets a complete victory.
It's like, I am the perfect war master. You missed the spot. I'm still perfect. No. Seriously, you missed the spot.
So, okay, maybe this is probably the best way to describe this. The Drop-Site Massacre is that it was strategically brilliant and sound, anyways, by the traitors, and it was that good as much as it was so strategically disastrous and not well done, anyways, by the loyalists.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if the loyalists had planned better, they might have done better. But Horus, I don't think, anyways, could have planned this any better. I mean, it was almost perfect.
Yeah.
The only thing I could think of, anyways, is that his fleet doesn't show up, does it? At the end of the battle?
No, it shows up. It reappears later.
Okay, but it doesn't show up anyways, and it's not like the four legions, anyways, that turn traitor that end up killing the other three, right?
So what ends up happening is they get in a fight, and then the fleet shows up while they're fighting against each other.
Okay. So the only thing I could think of, anyways, is that he timed that better, so that they were just so grossly overwhelmed, anyways, that you could have a complete victory in space. But that's the only thing I could really think of.
An impossible thought, anyways, because of the fact that, like I mentioned, they had their shields up because, lo and behold, you're in a war zone. You want to be protected.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, okay, so he could have set it up anyways where they're just like, oh, his ships are gone, but he has them like hidden behind a planet or something. So they really are still there. And then they could come back around anyways and smash them.
Yeah, they had the capability of doing that. Yeah.
Right. But the loyalists, on the other hand, anyways, completely, honestly, their fall at this particular point, to me anyways, is that they were led by an emotionally imbalanced leader. And they just didn't tactically, anyways, look at this very well. They just stormed in, anyways, guns blazing, instead of actually looking at the situation, going, okay, how do we beat this guy? I mean, like I mentioned before, anyways, when you start out a battle, anyways, on equal terms, that's not a good thing.
Right. Well, like I said, if they had done it where they had one force, I mean, with the traitors coming down on them, the thing is if you had set up the way that I had suggested it being set up, where there's 3 different drop places, they wouldn't have all been wedged in that one place either.
Right. You would have been able to disperse your 2 flanks out at least.
Yeah. And so they would be able to actually be flexible enough to go around possibly behind the people that just tried to ambush you.
Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that they could have won that battle at that point.
No.
But
I do think it would have been a lot less disastrous.
Right. I think a whole lot more of them would have been able to escape.
Well put, brother. But what happened after the Drop-Site Massacre?
Well, in the days after the battle, the traitor legions salvaged a large number of vehicles, war gear, and other war material from what the loyalist legions had left on the field. This salvage was repaired and modified for the traitor legions' use, and then put back into the frontline service to be used against the Imperium. Some of this equipment would still be in service with certain Chaos Space Marine warbands all the way up till now in the 41st millennium. Orbital space around S-Von 5 was busy as the vessels of 8 legions assumed formation prior to transit to the system's Mandeville jump point.
Are we in the 42nd millennium now?
Yeah, I think we are actually. So yeah, I think they're still around. I mean, they might have all disappeared anyway.
No, they all died in the last millennium.
Well, they might have, that whole Cadia business that we talked about. But anyways, over 3,000 vessels jostled for position above the darkened 5th planet, their hulls bursting with warriors sworn to the service of Horus. Tanks and monstrous war machines had been lifted from the planet with incredible efficiency, and an armada greater than any in the history of the Great Crusade assembled to take the fire of war into the very heart of the Imperium. Following the victory of the Drop-Site Massacre, Horus called a meeting with the Primarchs of all 8 of the traitor legions aboard his flagship,
The Vengeful Spirit.
5 of the Primarchs, including 4 who had fought on Esteban 5, met in person, including Horus, of course, Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion, and Lorgar. Well, Fulgrim kind of did, but if you want to know more about that, check out my box anyways, The Fall of Fulgrim. But anyways, 3 appeared through the use of hololithic emitters that transmitted their signals through the warp, including Peter Rabo, Conrad Kurz, and Magnus the Red, who had only recently joined the traitors after the scouring of Prospero, when the broken remains of the 15th Legion had been transported by Zinch into the Eye of Terror to the planet of the sorcerers. The Thousand Sons, bitter at what they perceived as their betrayal by the Emperor, now willingly became the 8th Traitor Legion. The Council of Traitor Primarchs made their plans for the next step in their war against the Emperor, and then each legion went its way according to its assigned role. Unbeknownst to the surviving Raven Guard, Alpha Legion operatives had secretly infiltrated their ranks during the Drop-Site Massacre, surgically altering their own operatives to resemble dead Raven Guard legionnaires, and then asserting them into Corax's Legion during the chaos of their flight following the slaughter of the Urgal Depression. Alfarius,
I am Alfarius.
have been told by the secret alien organization known as the Cabal.
Oh no, not the Cabal again.
Yes. That the 19th Legion was going to receive in the future an extremely valuable top secret Imperial asset that would be of great use to the cause of Horus. The fleets of Angron, Fulgrim, Mortarion, Lorgar, and Horus's own Legion would rendezvous on Mars. Now that word had come from the tech priest Regulus, the Mechanicum's liaison with the 63rd Expedition Fleet, of that planet's fall to Horus's supporters within the Dark Mechanicum during the internal conflict known as
The Schism of Mars.
where the manufacturing facilities of Mondus Gamma and Mondus Oculum wrested from the control of the Emperor's forces. The forges of Mars were free to resupply the War Master's army. The eager warriors of the Alpha Legion were singled out by Horus for a vital mission, one upon which the success of the entire venture would depend. Following Horus's manipulation of Leman Russ into assaulting the homeworld of the Thousand Suns, the Space Wolves were known to be operating in the region of Prospero. In the nearby system of Chondax, the White Scars and Jagatai Khan were sure to have received word of Horus's rebellion and would no doubt attempt to link up with the Space Wolves. Horus could not allow such a grave threat to appear, and so the warriors of Alfarius were to seek out and attack those legions before they could join forces. The Night Haunter's fleet had already departed, bound for the planet of Sigulsa, a remote world in the eastern fringe that lay shrouded in the shadow of a great asteroid belt. From there, the Night Lord's terror troops would begin a campaign of genocide against the imperial strongholds of Heroldor and Thramus, star systems that, if not taken, would leave the flanks of the War Master's strike on Terra vulnerable to attack. The Thramus system was of particular importance, as it comprised a number of Mechanicum Forge worlds, whose loyalty was still to the Emperor. The ships of the Iron Warriors prepared to make the journey to the Fall system, where a large fleet of Imperial Fist vessels were known to be regrouping after the failed attempt to reach Esfon 5, in time to join the Loyalist assault. Though Rogel Dorn's warriors had played no part in the Drop-Site Massacre, Horus could not allow such a powerful force to remain unmolested. The anonymity between bitter Perturabo and proud Dorn was well known, and it was with great relish that the Iron Warriors set off to do battle with their old rivals. With his flanks covered and the Space Marine forces that could potentially reinforce the heart of the Imperium soon to be embroiled in war, the traitors are ready to unleash 9 Terran years of devastating civil war upon the Imperium in the name of Horus and the Dark Gods.
Well, brother, since you know what's to come, what do you think the War Master did well here, and what could he have done better?
Once again, anyways, I shall bring up Sun Tzu. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Now, the reason I bring this up again, anyways, is because, as we've already mentioned, Horus knows himself. He's a pretty good commander, as we've mentioned, and he knows his enemy well. There should be an added part to this, though, to that saying, anyways. It should be, anyways, if you know the enemy and you know yourself and your allies, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. His biggest problem that's coming up, anyways, is what he does with his brothers. Actually, okay, there's a couple problems. One is that there comes a point here coming on, anyways, and we probably won't have time to discuss it in the next coming weeks. But at this point, both you and I both agree, anyways. Horus is still pretty tactically sound of mind. He's still all there, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. He's become evil, but at the same time, anyways, he's still all kind of in charge of his own mind. That takes it. Go ahead.
As much as Erebus would allow, for what we know.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. No,
as we know, Erebus is the master.
We're not even going there. I had to do a short box on him. We don't need to talk about that guy anymore. Although he will probably pop up again and again. But
we don't need to talk about him anymore. Like, we had to do in this one.
Yeah, exactly.
We had to mention him here too.
But no, there comes a point, anyways, in the next few years, anyways, where he ends up on a planet called Molech, I believe, and he ends up in the warp, and he ends up becoming infused by the rest of the Chaos Gods at that point. And at that point, he really becomes insane and drunk with power.
And I think he left part of his soul in the warp too.
In the Imperium too. Yeah, it's very convoluted and it's bizarre. But when he comes back, he's not all there. It's the best way to describe it. But on top of that, and that plays a huge part, anyways, of what takes place, anyways, afterwards. I mean, he's not nearly the tactical, brilliant genius that he is here. The other problem, though, is that while he knows his enemies and he knows himself, his allies, for some reason, anyways, he kind of lets them run rampant. He doesn't hold the leash on them. He doesn't, it's just they kind of go off and end up doing their own things. And it's no. We need a concentrated force. But
on that note, there's a couple of things I'd like to mention. First of all, Alpha Legion.
That's an ally that he never had any idea, anyways, what they were doing.
Yeah, so you mentioned before how they infiltrated the Raven Guard.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I also find funny is, and this is something that even Horus wasn't aware of, is literally Alpharius and Omegon impersonated him to stop a fleet from chasing
world eaters,
fleeing Raven Guard ships.
Well, yeah, because
they have the cult impersonate him.
Yeah, well.
Oh, and then later, this material that they're supposed to get for him, the material that's supposed to be a huge asset for Horus and, it'll help him win the thing. They take that for themselves and hand off fake stuff to him.
What was it? Wasn't it? It was like true gene seed stock, right?
Gene seed, stock or something like that. And they gave him fake. But they kept the actual stuff.
As we've discussed about Alpha Legion, anyways, it's almost like they're almost loyalists.
They are truly renegade.
Yeah. It's like, what are they thinking? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. I still think one of my favorite parts is afterwards, anyways, when they invade, Alpharius invades the Sol system, and Omegon shows up after. Oh, okay, Alpharius or Omegon, we don't know who it was, but one of them, anyways, gets killed by Dorn. And the other one shows up, anyways, with all the battle plans for the Sol system. He puts it in front of Horus, and then he literally just destroys it in front of him, and then leaves. And Abaddon wants to kill him, and Horus is just like, no, we can't do that. Why not? Because we don't know what he's doing. I don't know how powerful this guy is. If I rise up against him, who knows? He might turn around and I don't know, send a fleet of orcs against me or something. Who knows?
Or who knows? I may turn around and all of a sudden, all of my men are
Alfarius. Yeah.
You
He
just
charges after him out and he comes out of the tent anyways. It's like, oh, what's that? Is that a fleet of Necrons, Tyranids, and orcs? And they're all working together. Huh. How the hell did that happen? I am Alfarius. Ah, dang it. Yeah. But okay.
Even the Necrons, there's this head that pops up, like the Silent King thing. We are Alfarius. Son of a! They've even somehow infiltrated the Necrons. How?
But yeah, it's and yes, he had no idea anyways what Alfarius was doing, but nobody did. So I'm not going to put that on Horus's plate. Okay, nobody knew what Alpha Legion was doing, but the rest of them, anyways, it just seemed like they kind of went off on their own vendettas, and while he's just like, no, we need to take Terra. That's the whole point, and they're just like, well, but Fulgrim's like, well, I want to be a demon, or Perturbo's just like, no, screw you, I'm going to kill Dorn, or they all just kind of go off and do their own things. The Night Haunter.
I don't think he really cared so much when it came to the Iron Warriors because he kind of needed the Imperial Fist to be tied up. So why would he bother, ordering him to do something that he's already going to be running off to do anyways?
Right. But I mean, the rest of him, anyways, it was almost like he just let the leashes go on the dogs and was just like, okay, have at it. And instead of,
And then he sent Mortarion to talk to. Or was it just Mortarion decided to talk to?
That was Mortarion decided to talk to Jagatai. Yeah. Yeah, no. Mortarion.
Which is interesting because I think Horus more than also approaches him later, doesn't he?
What's that?
Yeah. Horus approaches him after Mortarion does.
Jagatai?
Yeah, it's weird.
I don't remember that. What happened? Oh, obviously, anyways, Jagatai is like,
no. The first time I want to say he does both cases. That Horus also shows up. At one point, he shows up and he's just like, no, I do think that the Emperor screwed up, but I've sworn loyalty to him, and I know what you have, and what you have is even worse.
Yet again, that's that whole thing anyways. Know yourself and know your enemies.
The funniest thing, though, is he's one of the people that, this is one of the things that's funny, is one of the people that the Khan actually had a kinship with was Horus. And Horus didn't know what he was going to do.
Well, yeah. There's a couple people Horus, like I said anyways, Horus had no idea what they were going to do. He had an inkling anyways of Jagatai. And quite frankly, anyways, if the whole debacle with the Chondak system and the Alpha Legion hadn't taken place, Horus might have been able to sway Jagatai. Maybe.
I don't know.
I know. Everybody likes the Khan, but at the same time, anyways, like you said, Horus kind of had a bond with him, as opposed to the rest of his brothers who really didn't.
Well,
other than saying,
actually, he had one with Magnus, actually, also.
Yeah. I mean,
the Khan did also have the...
Yeah, two traitors. Two traitor legions. That's why I said, I mean, I could see Horus being able to do it. It would have been a really
except for the fact that one of the things about the Khan was his undeniable loyalty to his oaths.
Right.
Unbreakable loyalty. So I don't see him even.
The only way, like I was gonna say, the only way that I think Horus could have actually turned him to his side is if he had a way, anyways, of convincing Jagatai that the Emperor had betrayed his oath to Jagatai.
In other words, he'd have to find a way to make it look like the Emperor destroyed his planet.
Or killed a bunch of his sons or something along those lines. Which, by the way, if you've got somebody like, I don't know, Alfarius anyways working for you, you can get away with that.
Yeah, the same people that sort of helped reveal the plan to the Khan, even though they were supposed to delay it.
Yet again, nobody knows what Alfarius is doing. Here's the sad part. I don't even think Alfarius knows what he's doing at this point. I think he's just rolling dice. What do we do today? I see. We're traitors today. And then tomorrow it's like, oh, we're loyalists. Sweet. You know? I don't know. That guy's out there. But what do you think, anyways? So we are coming up, anyways, to the end of the Horus heresy here. Now, I know, anyways, I said there's like 9 years of it, and we have actually talked about some of the more interesting parts, like the Mazone Crusade and the Secundus Imperialis and the Thramis campaign, and there's a bunch of stuff that we have talked about. But we are moving into the end game here, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks. So what do you think, anyways, going into it, anyways, from this point moving forwards? What do you think Horus could have done better, and what do you think he did well?
Not gone insane.
So that's what he could have done better. Not gone insane.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I think one of the problems he had, though, was there were too many outliers that he didn't know what to handle.
You mean like within and without his ranks?
Yes, in both cases.
Okay, so like, let me see if I understand what you're saying. Like, for instance, Jagatai Khan or Alfarius. He had no idea what they were going to do. Or,
for that matter, let's face it, he had like pretty much next to no control over Ingron. It was sort of like point and hope he stays in that direction.
He should have just kept Angron on his ship. He should have kept him chained in his ship, and then every battle they had, anyways, just drop him in a drop pod and go, there you go kill. At this point, yeah. But,
like Eversur Assassin.
Yeah, pretty much.
Defrost him, chuck him out there. Okay.
So those are the things, anyways, you think, anyways, he did not do well. What do you think the things that he did, anyways, moving forward, that he did do well?
He was able to keep the people that are under him at least loyal enough that he's able to keep them remotely connected, which is something hard to do with how vast and different the Primarch's characters are.
Right.
Like you have, for example, the ever-raging Ingron. And then you have Mortarion, who is more of a deadpan kind of person.
He's malicious.
And in comparison, and then you have, he really didn't handle Alfarius, but we're still putting him aside. Okay. And then
I would say that's actually more of one of his faults, because I don't think he did very well, anyways, with dealing with his brothers. I mean, they all kind of ended up doing their own thing. I thought, anyways, he would have done significantly better if he kept them on, like a tighter leash.
Well, I think Lorgar was also a huge impact.
What do you mean?
Because he was originally, the main supporter. And then later we find out that due to actually the event of the Drop-Site Massacre, Lorgar was already starting to change his mindset towards different things.
Kind of. I mean, he still believed in Horus being the leader, anyways, of the four Chaos Gods. It wasn't until he went to Molech.
No, it was even before then that he was starting to think that things weren't. He was starting to lose it. But
okay. There were things that he didn't like. Like, for instance, and this is another thing, anyways, that I mentioned, anyways, in the fall of Fulgrim. But like I said, where Fulgrim was kind of there during this great meeting, that's because at that point, anyways, he'd actually been taken over by a demon. It's a long story.
He actually wasn't really there. He was trapped.
Right.
Inside his body.
And the only person that realized that, anyways, was Lorgar.
And then he got pissed.
Oh yeah, he got pissed. And it's one of the few times, anyways, that and like I even mentioned in this chronicling, anyways, Lorgar was always considered the scholar. He wasn't a warrior, kind of thing. But in this instant, anyways, there's a point, anyways, where he literally throws Fulgrim up on the wall, and Horus goes to intercede against him, And Lorgar literally psychically stops him
Yeah.
and has him sit down. It's a very interesting part, and like I said, you guys should look it up because it's in the Fall of Fulgrim. It's great.
It's that part where he truly starts to, though, you see him really start to turn down a different pathway than he was originally going down, though.
I think it was more along. I think he's still staying on the same path. I think it's more along the lines of he didn't think Horus was the right one, anyways, to lead the army.
Because he was starting to see it differently. Originally, he thought, yeah, he's the person who should be doing it, and then he's starting to see these different things starting to pop up now. Like he's just laying a demon control of Primarch. Yeah, that's a way to go about things. So he's seeing things like that. Is like, okay, is he actually in control of the Chaos Gods, or are they actually basically starting to control him?
Right.
And that's where he really starts to find fault.
By the way, spoiler alert, it doesn't work out very well for Lorgar. He tries to take over, and Horus kind of kicks the crap out of him.
It also doesn't help the fact that Lorgar himself gets betrayed.
Yeah. There's a lot of betrayal that goes on in this within his own ranks.
Yeah.
But like I said, getting back to the question I had before, anyways, what do you think, anyways, the War Master is going to do well in this crusade against humanity?
Kill a lot of people.
That's all we got. Well, folks, on that sad note, that be it for this week. Join us next week as we discuss the end of this debacle, the Siege of Terra.
Pardon me, brother, but perhaps we discuss the Schism of Mars next week. After all, we should cover it.
Quite right, brother. Well, folks, we will be changing the format a little at the end of this month because of the Schism of Mars. Instead of having the end of the month be our usual Q&A, we will be doing the Siege of Terra.
Okay, but when will we be doing our Q&A?
Well, we will be doing it the following Saturday on the 23rd as a live stream on our YouTube channel, Tales of Asheraka. We will also answer any questions you find folks have on the live stream, as well as rank our favorite Primarchs, along with some bonus characters.
Neato! Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this Vox. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and comment. And don't forget to check out the shop. We got some cool stuff there, like clothes, pillows, and hats.
Oh, don't forget rabbits, Yuksen.
Right, and don't forget the rabbits.
Have a great day. And as always,
Until next time, this is Zeckthar
And Yuksen.
signing off.